Hello, listeners. Welcome to the second Mad Scientist Roundtable. I am Chris Cogswell, and I am joined here by Marie Mayhew.
Da 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 da!
With a better microphone. Hooray!
Yes.
All right. So this week we're going to be talking about all kinds of cool stuff. We still haven't really figured out what we're going to do for an intro.
No, we need a better intro.
We need a better intro.
Yeah.
I guess the song is fine, but we need a better intro.
Well, I was, off the top of my head under pressure, but I do have a better microphone. And as I was telling Chris, it looks like I should be gearing up gearing up to hunt kaiju.
It's true.
I'm going to get into gypsy danger. I'm going to go out into the ocean and start hunting class 5 kaiju.
That's right. I do want to make it clear for the listeners that already we've been on this call now like 20 minutes setting up. I've seen Marie drink about 3 cups full of coffee. So this will be good.
I'm trying to maintain a very high level of scientific acumen.
Nice. All right.
Instead of drinking, and this is actually, we can do it as a a blind study test. Last time I was drinking wine. This time I'm drinking coffee. Let's see what happens.
Let's see
where the logic goes.
What kind of humor we get from the difference in liquid we're imbuing here. Nice.
Welcome to the Mad Scientist Roundtable.
Yeah. All right. So last time we were kind of like all over the place, which was fun, I thought.
It's good.
But we've had some questions and stuff from listeners, and we've also had some ideas for cool stuff that we'd like to talk about. So, Marie, do you want to start?
So, I think one of the things that we were puzzling over coming up is neurocore. And what is neurocore? And why is neurocore all of a sudden being discussed in the news and everywhere else because of a certain cabinet pick who has a big fear of grizzly bears.
Very big fear of grizzly bears. Whether or not
education.
that's warranted, I do not know. But
I do not know.
But it's quite interesting.
It could be.
So give us the rundown here. So neurocore.
So
like
neurocore is basically, it is being sold as a treatment in certain locations, sounds like in Michigan, as a treatment for ADHD and for autism and for other learning disabilities in kids and in adults. And the premise behind it is you sign up, you go into sort of a strip mall location or wherever it is, and you sit down with a specialist and you kind of go through what's ailing you and what the problems are. And they set you up on a biofeedback program to help solve your ailment of ADHD or just other sundry learning disabilities. And you may get so you're going to be doing some biofeedbacks and some sort of mental, what they call brain performance. They're brain performance centers. So you put on this brain performance regimen of vitamins and eating right and biofeedback. And so there's that.
So there's that.
So, I mean, that could be inherently, and we can discuss why that is inherently problematic because there is a lot to that. But probably the big thing is that Betsy DeVoe holds a stake of about anywhere between $5 to $25 million in this pyramid scheme of which you should be familiar with as being one of the Amway heirs, but she still hasn't divested as of when she was confirmed. She still hadn't divested in that, and it also probably is a pretty good indication of how she views learning and how she views the brain and how she views science and how she views what's possible and what's not. And they're also very, very anti-medication.
Right.
So you can go in and you can have a severe ailment, and they would recommend moving away from, or hypothetically, they would recommend moving away from medication.
So this says, so if you go on their website, right, what I find kind of interesting is when you click on learn more, it always goes to the schedule assessment page. So it's like, oh, you're interested in learning more? Well, why don't we get you on the phone so we can hard sell you, right? So this says brain. Okay, so it says brain performance training at a NeuroCore Brain Performance Center. Our 45-minute neurofeedback and biofeedback sessions take advantage of your brain's ability to change its neuroplasticity. With neurofeedback, I like that they put neuro in front of everything.
Well, you got it.
Right?
It's about the brain.
It makes it sound like super legit, right? So, okay, so with neurofeedback, you watch a movie that plays when your brain speed is within the therapeutic range. When it goes out of range, the movie pauses, which tells you that something is out of balance.
So, what is coffee? My brain speed is now
high. You need NeuroCore. It says during the
brain speed. I mean,
during the 30-session program, your brain learns how to stop spiking out of range, and brain function improves. What range? With biofeedback, you learn to breathe deeper and slower to maximize your heart function, allowing proper blood flow and oxygen flow. Okay, so it's like literally those silly things where they make you, they claim like, oh, the yogis that do this on the mountains of Nepal can slow down their heart rate magically, right? And like that stuff's legit sometimes.
That stuff's legit.
Yeah.
Well, there has been, I was going to say that. So biofeedback to me, this whole thing sort of smacks of Scientology in some ways too, right? Like you're going to be holding on to these rods and they're testing your whatever this weird, it's all like this faux science stuff, and there's brain waves and biofeedback and how do you best train it and what's the good and what's the bad between it. But I did check it out, and there actually was a Harvard study done in 1981 with the Tibetan monks being able to use self-regulation to raise their body temperature. However, let's just qualify that by saying, I think that there's a huge difference between an 8-year-old kid with autism and or a learning disability and a Tibetan monk.
Yeah, totally,
right? I mean, it's like
someone who's like spent their entire life training to be controlled and you know what I mean, like mystical in some way.
Measured and like if you're doing, I think to retrain your brain to be able to do these things, you probably have to have a fairly strong regimen starting from when you were a child all the way of meditation all the way until an adult, and that's what your focus is to do. Like I don't think you can go in, watch a movie, be like, oh my god, my brain is spiking, and then self-regulate. Right.
So it's interesting, right? Everything that I can find on it basically makes it sound like it's like mindfulness, right? Which is this it's this new, not really new, but it's sort of this like very popular form of therapy for people that have like ADHD, things like that, right? Where Tourette's is sometimes treated with this, so is like things like OCD or bipolar or whatever. And so the basic idea is that like you focus on you note that your bodily functions seem to be going faster than they normally would, right? So I'm nervous. I don't know why I'm nervous, but I seem to be nervous. And then focusing on those feelings and kind of working your way down to a point where, okay, I note that it's going on, but I'm safe, nothing's happening. And then eventually it kind of disperses, right? I'm sure I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it. But again, there's something significantly different between if you're, ADHD is a serious thing, right? If your child is ADHD, then there's going to be all kinds of different like therapies and things that can help them. Medications, maybe, whatever. But yeah, this brain training thing seems so strange.
Well, what's crazy about it too is it's like, again, you have to have a certain amount of awareness that that's happening to you to regulate. And it's like, I think there's also with ADHD, you may not have that type of awareness. You may not be able to be like, something's wrong, but you may not know what it is or even how to slow something like that down, even if you can slow something like that down. Because if you have that type of awareness, something's wrong, ergo you should be able to stop it, I think is one of the huge fallacies about these types of diseases. Like, oh, well, you are aware of it. You're aware that there's something that's afflicting you. You should be able to take a vitamin and it's going to be better. And it's like, no, you wouldn't do that with, glaucoma. You wouldn't do that with, a heart defect. If you had a defective valve, you wouldn't do that with any other things that are actually physical ailments. Why was just a simple awareness of it going to be able to make a difference? Or why is that even a valid? Sorry, now I'm all like flipping over the table and yelling, let's put the coffee down. But you get what I'm saying. And I think what is so, like you're saying, what is so crazy about that is like, how is this science? Like, how can you even put, like, how dare you put a neuro in front of this, ma'am?
Right, yeah.
What is that? Where does that come from? But the scientist who's, if you're on the site, you can take a look. The scientist who's behind it, who's behind sort of all of this tomfoolery, this jargon, this whatever I'm trying to think of.
His name is not. It's not Dr. Tomfoolery.
It might as well be. Is like a pretty accredited cat. Like, he's got some serious credentials. He did studies in Alzheimer's and how to try and improve memory in dementia and Alzheimer's in people of advanced age.
Right.
Which again, I think is could be inherently different than someone with autism or ADHD, which are the two big ones that they cite on their site.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. He's got a lot of like publications and things, so it makes me wonder how legit or how how serious this stuff is, right? Some of this stuff is like in pretty good journals too, like Neurology or I saw one in here that was in a pretty.
They have neuro in front of them, so I trust it.
Yeah, well, Nature Reviews Neurology, right, is an okay journal, whatever. He's been in some case reports. He's had some other things going on. Like, it definitely seems like a real guy, right? A real researcher and things. The question I think always is, the question I guess is, as always with these sort of things, maybe there's something to it, right? Maybe there is something useful, but the fact, so there's such a long history of, there's always like you yeah. Well, like you said, there's this background to it of like anti-medicine, anti-science, right? Where you think, well, no one when I was a kid had like that's one thing I think is really interesting. You see all these stories where people are like, well, what's with the millennials that now they're all depressed and anxious and stuff? Or like, what's going on? And actually, I think you asked me that question when we first met. Right? When we first went out to the bar that time, you were like, what is it with, you asked what my take was on this idea that millennials are all anxious and depressed and things. Right? I feel like I remember that. Maybe
I probably did.
We were drinking beer, but
I was just so our viewers have some context, I was probably drunk.
The interesting thing I think about that.
What is it with you millennials and your depression?
Why are you all so sad?
We would just suck it up in my day.
The thing, but seriously though, that is that's a thing people think, right? They think like, well, why, everyone's taking medicine today. Everyone's on high blood pressure medicine. Everyone's on depression medicine, whatever. And so the question always comes up, like, is that because more cases of that are starting, or is it because we're getting better at diagnosing it, right?
At understanding.
So one really interesting case of that is actually with autism. People seem to think that autism cases are on the rise, but they've actually been pretty flat for a while. And a big part of that is that more people are starting to find females with autism or with Asperger's or whatever, right? And it's because that the symptoms are completely different depending on the gender of the person.
Interesting.
Right? So so while a female sufferer with Asperger's may not show the same kind of social problems that a male with Asperger's would, they tend to be able to like hide it better. they do show the same kind of like thinking or developmental disorders that may come with it, right? Same way with autism.
Right.
So there may not seem to be any kind of social dysfunction in things, but they're having a harder time in school. They get very anxious. They like routine, whatever, right? So the symptoms show up differently. And it's only now that we're getting better at like, oh, this is what the brain scan of someone with autism looks like. We can pinpoint it, right?
Wow. So they have different coping.
Exactly.
Yeah, they cope differently than boys do in some ways.
Right. Or I always think like when I was a kid, I remember my mom telling me that because one of my cousins has autism, and he's very high functioning though. So when I was a kid, I hardly knew anything was going on. But I remember my mom telling me at some point that back in Italy where they lived, they had a cousin with autism who just like didn't go to school. He just worked on the farm. And so it was kind of like they were just like, well, he's a little weird. What are you going to do? It's in Italy, whatever.
But I hadn't heard that about women being diagnosed more. I think what's interesting to me too, is it's gone undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. This whole branch has, and now there's, you're finally starting to come out of some stigma with it and some sort of misdiagnosis with the vaccination myth around autism. You're finally starting to push it into more science, and that's bringing so much more to light. Like, because if I look back, like as a child, we would have never, there was no dyslexia. There was no ADHD. There was no autism. It was, again, I think we probably were treated with biofeedback and vitamins for the most part on a lot of this stuff. And it's like, boy, it's like if you can start to understand this stuff and demystify it. But I will say, tying it back to NeuroCore and Betsy DeVoe, this kind of thing, I mean, it is, in my opinion, it doesn't help because it is eliminating an entire course of treatment, right, by still attaching stigma to it, which is medication.
Yeah,
and
it could. I mean, maybe this thing would work for some people, right? Like we don't know. It seems like there is some evidence that it has effectiveness with things like Alzheimer's, right, or things like like other sort of like not memory disorders per se, but more like personality disorders, I guess, where you change your thinking. Like I said, like mindfulness training is that same kind of idea, right? But the problem, like you said, is that, it's clearly profit driven. And the way that they make the profit is by being like, well, don't take medicine. You know what I mean? Like,
that's bad.
We can YouTube the depression away. You know what I mean? Or whatever the hell they do, making you watch videos and crap. Like, what's really funny was when you said that they're like these, so I don't know if this is actually a valid like way to think about this, but when I was like, even now, I have this big thing against going into a doctor's office or a dentist's office or whatever that's like in a strip mall, right? I'm always like, I don't know how legit these guys are. He's next to a McDonald's, right?
Sort of with you. Yeah. He's next to a 99-cent store. I don't know how I feel about this.
Right. I don't know where he's getting his tools, but I'm not so sure. But when we first moved to Boston, Katie and I, Katie's got like some kind of like, just dental. Katie's whole family has really specific dental problems. So like they're all born without, they're all born like missing some random teeth, right? And they just never grow, right?
Can I just tell you that Katie and what I've learned about her is absolutely fascinating.
Oh my God.
Like the picture that I'm putting together of Katie, and now that I hear like she's born with, it's like a hereditary affliction of the monarch family that Katie comes from. And I'm like,
she's got vampire teeth or something. Yeah. No, I know.
I love this stuff.
We need to I'm going to try to convince her to come on here at some point and do an episode on like animal myths and stuff. Katie, for those,
probably like, can you just leave me out of it?
Right. I helped you pay for the stupid stickers. That's it, man. We're done. Katie, for those that don't know, is my fiance / wife / common law hetero life mate.
Poor beleaguered other.
Yes. So when we first got to Boston, though, like she had some kind of like dental thing that had to go on. And we couldn't find a dentist to treat her like in enough time, whatever, right? Like it wasn't like, oh my God, my tooth is abscessing. It was something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but we had to go to this guy whose office was in a strip mall full of like derelict offices and stuff. Like it was a mall, but it wasn't even a nice mall. There was like, it was all like 99-cent stores and, you know, slightly irregular pastry shop, and like it was all really strange.
Dented can outlets.
Yeah, and like he was in the food court. So on his card it said, "Come to, you know, whatever, Dr. Whatever in the food court."
Wow.
And it cost us like $20. Like he didn't take our insurance, he fixed your thing, and he's like $20. I was like, "Oh my god, have I been wrong this whole time?" You know, I should get plastic surgery in a food court. Like, what's going on?
What? And they probably offer that. No, so then, you know, I don't want to sound like it could be kind of elitist. It could be like, oh, the coastal elitist thing. It's like, oh, I have a mistrust of, you know, a look down upon, you know, the strip mall kind of like, you know, if you have a medical need, and I mean, that becomes, and that has to be an option. Like, but then that kind of opens up again. Then you go into affordable healthcare. Like, you should have an option to be able to go to a facility that is a good hospital, but it has well trained, but that is clean, that is, you know, FDA approved, that has procedures and checklists and all that stuff that you really that's essential to well-being. And I think that with your mind, you should have the same options, and you shouldn't be going to something that's going to be a franchise by somebody who has almost a disdain for education in some ways too.
No, I think it's a big problem with mental health generally in the United States, that like it's looked at as, you know, these things are as debilitating as other, like there's a reason that the government is willing to pay you disability money and help you if you have some kind of like mental health issue, right? Like they're debilitating. They can really affect your entire life. But we think of them as almost like, you know, as like weak, or as some kind of like, you know,
it's a whim.
Right.
It's a whim. You're a whiner.
Exactly.
You're a whiner.
Like I think it goes back to that idea of like, you know, what was it called? Like, women's, like fainting women disorder or whatever, right?
The hysteria. Yeah.
Hysteria. Hysteria. You know, like really though, it is. It's like, you know, people think, well, you're just going into hysterics or something. And it's like, well, no, you can see like a brain scan of this person that it's really acting differently. So don't give me that crap, you know? It's a real thing.
And if they do use science, it is almost to prove an inferiority, right? It's an inherent inferiority, and it's not to look for treatment. It's again like with hysteria. Oh, she's just hysteric.
Yeah.
Another hysteric woman out there marching.
Damn them all. Freaking ladies, man. Yeah. So the other question we got was, who is Marie? Who are you? How did you come to be on this show?
Who is Marie Mayhew? Well, let me tell you, my friends, you don't want to know me. You don't want to know who I am. Let's just say, so I basically view myself as the J, Chris Cogswell's Silent Bob.
Not so Silent Bob. Not so.
But of all, like, so the one thing that I do know about, so I met Chris through the ARC, which is a research corp, and we study up and look for all kinds of fun stuff for a podcast called Astonishing Legends, which is excellent. And I had started listening to that, and I can't remember what episode it was, but I think I was unemployed at the time, and I was at home listening to podcasts, and they had one on, I think it was Polybius. Oh,
Polybius, yeah.
Polybius, right? And they were talking about Polybius, and I had gone through like Serial, which I loved, the first season of Serial, and like I went through, like, I devoured that. I devoured all of lore, and lore was like a little lightweight. I felt like I really loved like, all these weird things, but it was just sort of like this just 20 minutes, and you're just sort of like, and then for some reason I tuned into that episode just sort of randomly, and it's like these two cats just sort of like shooting the shit about video games and conspiracy, and like Scott saying that he owned like he waxed nostalgic about owning a Tesla console, or not a Tesla console, a Tempest console for a little while. And I was like, who are these guys? Like, what's this about? But it was really addictive because I felt like, they were engaging, they were smart. But then I was really frustrated because they ended the episode being like, "Yeah, we don't know. It sounds like it's a myth, but we don't really know for sure." And I was like, "How can you not know for sure?" Because one thing about like me and my thought process is I'm not very scientific, but I really love details, and I really get hung up on details and hung up on weird little stuff, and so I ended up pledging, I think, $25 a month on Patreon to their page and got an invite into the Ark. And, that was one of the perks at the time, is you can come in and you can kind of see what we're going to be doing for upcoming episodes, and you can meet the people that are in here already doing research for us, and, you can contribute your brand of crazy. And one of the first people that I reached out to, or that I started to chat with, was Chris Cogswell. And I had no idea. I had no idea about him or anything like that. But I remember waking up one morning, and I was thinking about something on the way to work that was in one of the podcasts that we were doing. And I thought about it, and I'm like, God, I wish I had somebody to talk to about this. Like one weird, like this one, I can't even remember what the hell it was. It was like some crazy ass thing, right? And then I was just like, fuck it, I'm gonna text him. And I'm like, hey, Chris, are you out? And he's, and immediately he's like, oh, what's up? And I'm like, I've got this crazy idea. Do you want to hear about it? And he's like, yeah, okay. And I was like,
I'm in the Ark, man. Of course.
It's sort of from there, it's just, de-evolved into us coming up with crazier and crazier. Like, again, like I will be like, oh my God. So I kind of think that that a giant mushroom cloud of radiation could do what, is there any kind of scientific or whatever? And you'll be like, oh, well, let's think about that. Or I think the tides.
The calculations.
Let's run the math. And I'm like, I think, I don't know if Snowball the dog could have physically fended off alien invaders. Let's take a look at it. So it's just been sort of this, again, I have absolutely zero science background. No, well, I wouldn't say that, but it's definitely not my native tongue. And
sure.
So that's just me. But I'm a big detail freak. I'm a big fan of mystery. I try and sum it up like really nice. I've been talking for 15 minutes about it, but I try and sum it up like I was the only person that was impressed with the Clone Wars opening, talking about a trade embargo.
The Senate.
The Senate talking about a trade embargo. There's a trade embargo. I'm like, wait, I know we're going to get to Anakin Skywalker's backstory, but I want to know a little bit more about this trade embargo. How is it affecting the Senate? What are the political ramifications? What is the actual thing that the embargo is on? What are they trading?
What's going on?
What's going on with that? Like, that type of detail to me is hugely fascinating and is strange. So there's that. So that's basically Marie Mayhew. In a nutshell, that's all I got. And I'll try and be sober for the majority of these.
Nice. Well,
it's like slightly less caffeinated.
I mean, it depends on when we do these. I mean, so today is noon where you are.
Oh, you were so close to a cutoff. I actually pushed it out.
Close.
It's like, well, noon. All right, we'll stick with the coffee. Had you dialed in at like 12:30? Nope. Switch over. So anyways, that is me.
Cool.
That is me.
Cool. Yeah. So I hope listeners, kind of have some idea of who you are now. Sort of, kind of. That's Marie.
Yes.
Cool. So okay. So we also had two other topics, right? That we're going to discuss, and we actually had another listener question too, which we're going to get to this episode.
Yes.
Totally. But okay. Let's do the listener question. So the other question we got was from, so that question was from Dan Aceta, who is a phenomenal undergraduate student at Northeastern University. He actually works in the lab with me, and they were my original listening base all my undergrads who were like, we don't get enough of
Made to
Chris.
listen.
We don't get enough of Chris in the lab telling us what to do, so we'll listen to him at home too.
We want to listen to
Yeah,
him.
I don't really understand what the hell they're thinking when they come home and listen to me.
Oh, man. Or what? Dan, I hope. How's that, Dan? How you like me now, Dan?
Yeah, Dan. So the next question came from Andrew Dayton, who's an awesome listener of the show and a good guy. He's on Twitter all the time asking questions and stuff. So the question from him was basically, I'm going to kind of paraphrase here, but he wondered, what pressure would you need to have to make a planet out of coal? Out of coal. What?
Out of coal?
The other thing
So
we're going to do
close.
today is clean coal.
So close.
That's going to be one of the other
So
things. What pressure do you have to reach to make a planet basically out of diamond? Or could there be a planet made of diamond? So we
First
actually
of all, I like his thinking.
it's really cool. I wonder what he was listening to when he thought of it, or what he was like watching or whatever. But
How to get chicks.
is that what he was like?
How can I pick up chicks?
You know what? This is the easiest way. Get a planet made of diamonds.
Hey, baby.
I think that's so interesting. Always that whole like the campaign to make diamonds a thing, right? Like
Yeah.
or even like in the Saint Germain episode of Astonishing Legends, we never really touched on it, but the fact that a couple of the crown jewels of England are actually fake.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, they're actually not real rubies. They're another.
Oh,
They're another much easier to produce, and you could make them as fakes during that time period, like really easily. They're made of, like ruby and sapphire, just aluminum oxides with different colorings and stuff from other impurities. But these are just like a really cheap, easy to make. Like we could make it in the backyard. Ruby, a fake ruby. They call them rubies, but they're not. We could. And today we would know the difference because you can actually
don't
check.
tempt me.
I know.
Don't tempt me because now I'm going to be like, all right, Chris, we're going out to the backyard. I've got some gasoline.
Yeah. So like a normal
bug repellent.
Like if you brought it to a jeweler, they could tell immediately that it wasn't real because of the hardness. It would be different than real sapphire or real ruby, and also like the clarity and things and the cut and whatever. And they could also just run. I'm sure they could just run a chemical analysis test on some of the scrapings or something, whatever. But back then,
or they could take one look at us and we're covered in soot.
Right? We smell like burnt bug spray or whatever the hell.
Bug spray.
You guys don't
and we're
look
all
serious.
shifty around, and they'd be like,
"Yeah, I don't know if this is legit what you guys are trying to
they
sell me."
wouldn't even have to get out the loop. They'd be like, "Yeah, you need to leave the strip mall."
Yeah. There was.
You may need to go see the doctor in the food court because you're bleeding.
One of you is bleeding. Go to the food court. All right. Anyways, so if you look at the phase diagram of carbon, so diamond is just carbon, and it's actually just a phase of carbon. And what I mean by a phase is just like water can turn into ice or it can turn into vapor, depending on how cold or how much pressure it's under. Carbon and every element, every molecule basically can do the same thing. And so this comes up with what's called a phase diagram. And so carbon's phase diagram shows that it goes from graphite, which is just like carbon black, right? It goes from graphite, and also different than graphene. Graphene is single layers of graphite, which they first made literally by using Scotch tape. Did you ever hear that story, Marie?
Scotch tape.
Okay, yeah. So it's amazing.
Is there something? What can't you do
with Scotch tape? I'm telling you,
or duct tape. Between the two, world domination.
Seriously, what they did was they took a pencil and they just like drew a big mark, like a splotch on a piece of paper, and they took some tape, they stuck it on there, took a layer, more tape on that tape, put another layer, over and over and over and over and over again, until they ended up with a atomically thin layer of graphite. Or graphene, which they called graphene.
And there's scientists doing this?
Yeah, no, this was like how they discovered it. Graphene sucks, by the way. It's a really cool material, but it's so hard to work with. Like, you open up the little package of graphene, and it's like just everywhere. Your whole lab is covered in soot because it's so light. It's so not dense. Okay, so looking at the phase diagram for carbon. The lowest temperature and pressure that you can make diamond at is at 0 Kelvin, so impossible. Anyways, because 0 Kelvin is absolute zero. It's like the temperature at which molecules don't move at all. So we can't get there yet. I think the closest we can get is like 0.3 Kelvin or something. Something like that. Like seriously, we can get below 1 degree, but we can't get much colder than that. So at around like 1 to 10 Kelvin, you can make diamond out of carbon by supplying 50 gigapascals of pressure. Okay. So 50 gigapascals is 50 times 10 raised to the 9th power pascals.
That's a lot of pascals.
Okay. So just as a quick thing, right? So if we take 50 gigapascals, right? And then we divide by 1.325. That is about 50. It's about 500,000 times the pressure on the surface of the Earth.
So my man couldn't be even using those diamonds
to
woo the ladies on this planet.
He'd be straight dead. His blood would boil literally. Actually,
I don't care what game you have. That's gonna hurt.
Yeah,
that's gonna impede you.
At that pressure and temperature, he would be at something not even resembling normal matter that we think of. At like around 0 Kelvin, things start to act like, because to reach 0 Kelvin, you need to be like so far apart that there is no like interactions, right, between atoms.
Oh, snap. Okay, so
things are getting weird. Anyways, the other extreme is at 10,000 Kelvin, which is pretty hot. You need 500 gigapascal. No, 0.5 gigapascal.
So still I'm still not seeing a diamond planet coming around anytime soon.
No, it's not anytime soon at all.
Not anytime soon. But we did doing some Google science work. I did locate a possible diamond mountain.
Yeah. No, it is 500 gigapascals. So sorry. At 10,000 Kelvin, you need 500 gigapascals of pressure around there. So crazy amounts of pressure. Crazy amounts of pressure, right? So we actually did the calculation out.
Chris did the calculation out. I drank coffee.
If we did
and sort of danced around.
If we used air, so if we use just normal air like our atmosphere and our gravity, the height of our atmosphere to make a diamond mountain on Earth would have to be oh my god, I should put in little apostrophes behind so I can get my numbers here. About 4 billion meters tall out of atmosphere. Our atmosphere,
that is like with our atmosphere.
Yeah,
so
our atmosphere currently is 12,000 meters. So we would need a huge. Actually, what's the difference between the Earth to the Moon?
It would be
Let's see. That's 238,000 meters. No wait, why did they give this to me in miles? In meters, you fool! Stupid Google. Miles. 384.4 million. So we're talking 4 trips, no, more than 4, like 9 trips to the moon of atmosphere.
Just
to make a diamond.
To get a diamond mountain.
To get a diamond mountain. Okay.
Just for that.
If we used a much more dense gas, right? So the calculation for pressure. So pressure is interesting. Pressure doesn't vary. What pressure is literally is it's the force per area that gas supplies or something supplies to a surface, right? So the units of pressure are force per surface area, right? So, the unit for pressure is the Pascal. That's the SI unit, the standard international unit, scientific international, right? Unit, scientific international. That's definitely not what SI stands for. The standard unit, the standard scientific notation unit for Pascal, for pressure is Pascal. And so pressure is equivalent. So pressure is equal to the density of the gas times the gravitational constant on Earth times the height of the gas. Okay.
I think it would just be easier for him to go to Zales.
It would be so much easier to go to Zales. So okay. Anyways, if we use tungsten hexafluoride, which is the heaviest gas I can find, that has a density of about 4,000 times that of air. So we're talking like you're swimming through gas, basically. That would require about 100 times the atmosphere of Earth height wise. So the only way that it could work potentially is if gravity was different, right?
It would have to be.
It would have to be.
Yeah.
And so that was the other calculation that we did. So what we looked at was how much force of gravity would you need if we had Earth's atmosphere height and Earth's atmosphere density to get that enough pressure to turn carbon into diamond. And that would be 333 times the gravity of Earth. So extremely.
Still not coming out of it okay.
No. I mean, no.
Yeah,
There's no way. There's no way
There's
you're
no
coming
scenario
out of it
this
okay.
works out.
No. There's no scenario where
here.
we could possibly make it
There's
unless
no win-win.
the only way I could think of it is if we sent like Mark Wahlberg or something up in a rocket to like explode the diamond planet, and then we collect the chips as they fall to Earth.
Shit, we should. You know what? That's a treatment right there.
That's the only way.
That's a treatment
We're
right
talking
there.
about asteroid. What was that stupid movie called? Armageddon, asteroid, or some crap like that?
Oh yeah, Armageddon.
Armageddon.
Yeah. Hello, Ben Affleck.
Okay, so
what's his name else? Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis.
Liv Tyler.
All right. So real talk right now. That was the first movie I cried to in a movie theater as a kid.
Shit, yeah, I know why you cried.
Armageddon.
That's a touching film.
It's very touching.
They might not come back, man. And they're not even getting diamonds out of this shit.
No.
Okay? They're just trying to save Earth.
And it's like
they're just trying to save Earth.
I don't want to miss a thing. You're like, no.
Oh, we're playing
God.
ass. Yes.
All right.
That's a beautiful film.
Beautiful film.
Beautiful film. That is a beautiful film, man.
So we actually found that there actually might be a diamond planet, though, right?
Yes.
Or there might be a planet with diamonds.
There might be a planet with diamond mountains.
Okay, and so they're in the Beta Pictoria system. That's the star that they revolve around.
Yes.
Crazy.
And let me see. I'm looking at my my page on it. And they were saying there's even a possibility. It is not implausible that there's life on this planet. That there'd be life on the planet.
Interesting.
And it certainly would be exotic. Well, hell yeah, you got diamond mountains, man.
So the one that I found actually was
there ain't gonna be no strip malls. There's no being boringness happening up there, man. That's bling a planet.
So this one that I found was it's planet 55 Cancri E, or maybe Sancri E.
Yeah, we got to work on that name.
It's a super Earth. Yeah, no one's going to Cancri E.
No, we got to work on that.
Is what's known as a super Earth because it is likely a rocky world orbiting a sun-like star, but it has a radius twice as large as that of our own planet and a mass 8 times greater. So that already, the mass of the planet is part of what determines the gravity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that already changes things quite significantly, right? The other thing that was really interesting was that the reason that they think this one might, or the planets in that system might have diamond or large diamond deposits, is that they're mostly made out of carbon. There's no oxygen, right? And so, or there's not a lot of oxygen. So it's like it might have an atmosphere as well, but obviously not made out of oxygen, maybe nitrogen or some other gas. But the fact that there's so much carbon there just, adds to the chance that there would be, graphite that then turns into diamond potentially.
It's enshrouded in a thick cloud of gas, and it's a mystery that has vexed scientists for years.
Nice,
because the gas should not be there at all, is what they're saying about said planet.
Huh.
I do want to say that if a movie comes out within the next 3 years with Mark Wahlberg or somebody like Mark
Wahlberg, be pissed. I'll be mad.
Going to space and blowing up something and getting diamonds off of it for his dying wife back home.
No, we called it. That's ours.
We called it?
It's ours.
And I'm going to want some royalties. I want the overseas royalties for that.
Journey to the... Saying. We call it. Journey to the Diamond Heart.
Yeah. Ooh, that's not bad. We're going to have to workshop that one. We're going to have to focus group that one a little bit. I want to,
Scott, tell your wife.
Oh, yeah.
Scott, tell your wife.
Yeah.
Get Wahlberg on the line.
We need
we need the hookup.
Well, he's not doing too much. He was just in that the Boston movie, right?
Oh yeah.
So he's not that busy, and he might be. Maybe we could go with somebody younger. I think we might. Wahlberg's even a little past prime. I think we need somebody a little bit more with the millennials. Somebody the kids like.
Okay, that is not the view of this podcast. I just want to say Mark Wahlberg is not past his prime. Okay, Marie's views are her own. Okay, okay. So what was the other thing we had? What was your thing? So the way we're going to do this is every week we're going to tell each other some of the stuff we look at so that we can at least look it up. And then the other thing will be we'll do two things that are completely unknown or mostly unknown to either one of us. So I've got a science one. Marie's got a cool some other kind of one.
Crazy ass.
All right.
I was up late. So I was up late last night. And I was, paging, trying to find a good, is there a documentary or whatever to watch? And I was like, oh, hey, here's something called Cracking the Shakespeare Code.
Okay.
It's on demand, probably on one of your channels, right? And it's it's recent. And I'm like, I'll watch this. It's got a real life Dan Brown vibe to it. So I start watching it, and it's basically about this Norwegian guy. His name is Pietra Amundsen. I can't even get to his Amundsen. Pietra Amundsen.
Okay, I think
I'm gonna go with that.
Amundsen is a pretty famous-y kind of name.
Yeah, we're gonna go with that. Pietra Amundsen, and he is joined. So he's this very soft-spoken, quiet Norwegian organist who plays an organ for a church in Norway and coaches kids skiing. So very unassuming, right? Very unassuming.
Okay.
And he is joined by a scholar in Shakespearean studies, okay. Dr. Robert Crumpton, he's British, got to be British for that type of stuff, right? So he's devoted his life to Shakespeare and to studying Shakespeare, and is really this very, very serious about it. And so he gets wind, and he's contacted by this Norwegian organist saying, hey, I've been looking at the first portfolio of Shakespeare's work, and I have found some very strange irregularities in the work that question the authenticity of Shakespeare and question what is normally called in kind of, if you've taken any kind of English classes or an English major, the question of authorship, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a question of his authorship. So of course, Dr. Crumpton, has got to put the smack down on this type of stuff, because that we just can't have that. So it's about them meeting, and it's about this organist looking at the first portfolio of Shakespeare's work was put out in 1623, about 7 years after Shakespeare's death. And so it's this manuscript that is basically a certain amount of his poetry and then a certain amount of his plays. It's 20 some odd of his plays.
Okay.
So it's all of his famous works. You've got The Tempest, you've got Hamlet, you've got the histories. And it's a pretty big size. It's called a folio because it's oversized and it's a manuscript. And so it's the definitive position on Shakespeare. This is Shakespeare's work. It was put together by the people that knew him. We don't have any of his actual handwritten manuscripts, so it is the closest things to Shakespeare we have.
So this says here that it was written, first published in 1623.
Nice. Pulled that out of my ass, but yes. So and there have been other folios published since then, but this is the most famous, and there was only like 500 printed.
Oh wow!
And what?
So sorry, let's just to put some kind of like texture to this.
Context.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Shakespeare was born or was baptized April 26, 1564, and then died the 23rd of April, 1616. So we're talking that these were published only like, I mean,
after
less than 10 years after his death.
Yes. And again, just in case, I'm sure your well-educated listeners know this, but he was famous in his day. Like Shakespeare was very well known in his day, and his plays were popular. They were seen by common folk and royalty, and they were well performed and performed often. So he was well known. However, there's always been a question since then, did the man known as Shakespeare really write the plays that have the name Shakespeare on them? And there's all sorts of, you can listen to any type of podcast, there's all sorts of for instances on that, like, he couldn't have written it because he didn't come from royalty. He wouldn't have known half of the things that his plays are about, all the details that are in his plays about court intrigue and sort of how people lived at that time that were in a different social stratosphere than him. So he wouldn't have had knowledge of it, is one of the premises, which is again a semi elitist, but kind of, you've got some bearing, some gravity to it. So there's the question like, well, if he didn't write it, who did? So then there's the whole like, well, was it Francis Bacon, Sir Francis Bacon, which is always popular, Kit Marlowe, so forth and so on. So this documentary that I'm watching starts to raise that question. So he goes,
what was it called?
Dr. Crumpton goes, it's Cracking the Shakespeare Code.
Okay.
So this Dr. Crumpton goes and he kind of sits through Pietra's explanation of what he's finding in the folio. And he's basically saying, look, when I take the folio and if I apply a certain cipher to it, a coded cipher known as, oh my God, I'm going to have to pronounce this. Let me look at it again. Stenograph.
Yeah, okay, a stenograph. Sure.
Stenography.
Yeah.
If I look at this with a stenography cipher, this is what it tells me. And if I am applying kind of different numeric codes to it, basically it is giving clues to the fact that not only was Shakespeare not the author, there was more than one author. They were hiding something. There was two people that were actually behind the manuscript and were behind the stories of Shakespeare. And one step further, one step into crazy zone, it's a map. It's a treasure map. If you look at this big document, you go through it, it's a map to treasure. And I'm like, what? Come on now. I was just expecting like, it was Sir Francis Bacon. And because, I was a humanities major, which is sort of like an English major with a failure to commit. So I couldn't even I didn't even really I had some Shakespeare classes. I had to, we did a whole semester on the question of him being the author, what that means. And it's sort of like to me, in my opinion, at the end of the day, is it doesn't really matter because what would be gained from, why would you fake that? Why would you go through all this effort to hide to hide your identity from, I guess there's certain social reasons, but at the time, but they're not very compelling and they're not, you end up with the plays. You still have the work, which is really what is amazing and important and still and still relevant to this day. But, so that part of it was interesting and was actually sort of more grounded, as he's working through all these ciphers and he's saying, but if you add up if every letter becomes a number and you add it up, it spells out 100. And if you look on page 100 and you go down 100 spaces, it spells out bacon, or whatever, whatever he's working through it. I'm like, I'm in. I'm like, I'm about 80%. I'm like, that's pretty cool. But then all of a sudden, there's this leap. There's this fabulous leap, and it is, and all of a sudden they start talking about Nova Scotia. Like, they map it to Nova Scotia. And I'm like,
finally.
I don't like motherfuckers. No.
Now we're on the meat of the matter, Marie.
No.
We're digging a hole in Oak Island.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I was just like, what the, can we just for the love of Pete, and just in case anybody doesn't know, like, not only has I've done several diatribes about how I would just nuke that island at this point. That's so fucking frustrated, but what the fuck? I don't know what's in it, but just
what is down there?
There's something. Is it? No, I don't know. So, and of course, there's people with a much more studied approach, which is, conservation.
Yeah.
That you shouldn't be using thermonuclear weapons
on
Canada.
Right.
Don't nuke Canada.
Right.
Fine.
Just to find out what's in this hole, maybe.
Fine.
Probably nothing. Yeah.
Whatever.
It's, yeah.
But it's like, and again, Astonishing Legends did an amazing series on it that got me hooked on it. And there's the History Channel Curse of Oak Island, which ends every episode with, what do they know? They have found at the bottom of borehole X. And it's like, there's nothing ever down there.
It seems like if there is a curse on Oak Island, it's that they will never, ever finish writing books and making shows about Oak Island.
And I chose this, benign Dan Brown-esque documentary about a nice, soft-spoken Norwegian, and him kind of pissing off this professor who's looking at him with like that uniquely British mix of disdain and like sort of curious disdain. He smells, very removed, but like and all of a sudden it's back to Oak Island, and which actually was. I will say they did it was pretty interesting. It was pretty good. And it ended on sort of a curious note. Like they actually went to Oak Island, which I did not know. They went to, he, I guess, was in Pietra Amundsen actually went, I know. I'm sorry, people that are actually good at pronunciation out there. Norwegian.
We're sorry, Norway.
Norwegian or otherwise. I'm sorry, Norway. But he actually went there and dug in at certain places that the ciphers told him to dug in, and he did find some kind of crazy shit. Like he found giant rocks with flat sides. So I'm kind of like, no.
Interesting.
But
interesting.
It kind of leads back to my question of like, well, if you search hard enough for something,
you're gonna,
will you find it? Like if there's 900 pages in that folio, what I was be more interested in learning about this stuff is like how many times did he try and fail before he found the thing that he was looking for?
Yeah, I think
they don't talk about that.
I was gonna say, I think that's the beauty of the cipher. So actually, it's interesting. Francis Bacon came up with a cipher. Bacon cipher is what it's called. And it's pretty simple though. His cipher is just that like each letter in the alphabet is represented by a series of 5 letters, right? So it's like A is, A. B is A, B, right? And like it just kind of changes where they are. And so you can get a combination of letters and whatever. And then there are more complicated ones like book ciphers, right? Which is the first letter. Yeah, like the first letter of each word or whatever somehow comes up with a list of like 5 letters again, and then that represents a code within a book that's the key, right?
Right. But there's a central key that only the 2 people that know the code know of.
The interesting thing, I think, with trying to fit these into a work of art, right, is that I don't really see how. I mean, I know it is possible. Right? But usually the way that you do this is that the work of art itself isn't the cipher, it's the key. Right? The cipher is a random string of letters and numbers and whatever. And then if you have the book, you can write a message. It's not that they're hiding a message in critically acclaimed poetry or plays, right? So it makes you wonder, like, the genius that you would have to do that is it's intense, you know what I mean? It's insane that they wouldn't have thought of a different way or whatever. And then the other interesting thing I think is like what you were saying, if you keep looking, right? So like with the Enigma code, right?
Yes. Which is one of my favorites.
The problem with the Enigma code is that you can find all kinds of things that might work, but it's being sure that that is the one.
The one thing,
the one thing that's real, because you're trying to deploy bombs and make war decisions based on that, right? For those that don't know, the Enigma code is cracking the German, basically cipher, right? They encoded messages to each other in different ways, and so finding a way to get that fixed was very difficult. So the British ended up doing it with the help of
Turing.
Yeah, Alan Turing. And there's an amazing movie about it by it's got Benedict Cumberbatch, and it's super good.
Sherlock.
Yeah, he's fucking
he's
awesome.
good in
Anyways,
it.
Oh, he's awesome. He's good in everything. He just played my favorite superhero, Doctor Strange.
Oh,
pretty badass.
We should talk about
both
that.
A doctor and a strange guy. My favorite. Anyways,
oh my god.
And the other thing too that I think is so interesting with that is,
and by the way, really quickly, there's a guy who didn't need any neural core. He could self-regulate.
right. Yeah. So
he had that training.
I think the other interesting thing too is that like, if it is okay, two things, right? Two things quick. Three things actually. What I find really interesting is actually the difference between the versions of his plays that came out before the first folio was published that are straight garbage. Right? Mm-hmm. So this is just from Wikipedia. So this is the soliloquy in Hamlet. So the first folio version is to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or to take arms against a sea of troubles, right? That's poetic. It's so famous, whatever. This is the version that was in 1623 that it was published as the real thing. This was the version that was being put out in playhouses and things who didn't have access to the first folio or a good printing of Hamlet. It goes, to be or not to be, there's the point. To die, to sleep, is that all? It's so much worse. It's so much worse. It's like sometimes I'll read a book and Katie will be like, well, what was that about? And I'll try to explain to her and she's like, you are the worst storyteller. So I'm like, I gave her one like famously bad rendition of what Dracula was about. And she's like, all I know is that you need to read Dracula again because you couldn't get it out. Like you just like came up with some bull crap, The other thing that I think is so interesting is versions of the first folio that they find today sell for
Cha-ching.
Hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
Like, so this says there was one, let's see. So this says, okay, on 13th July 2006, a complete copy of the first folio was auctioned at Sotheby's auction house. The book, which was in its original 17th century binding, sold for £2.5 million hammer price. I don't know what hammer price is. £2.5 million pound. So
hammer price, I actually do know this. So hammer price is the price that you would buy it for, but then also the auction house will receive a premium on top of that.
Oh, okay, got it.
Normally, depending on what it sells for, they will also get an additional sum.
Oh, learning stuff. So that's interesting, right? Like, what are they going to find in that dirty mud pit in Nova Scotia? Like, you know what I mean? The folio itself is the fucking prize, man. Like, go after that. Well,
and it's just, it is hard to, you've got so much jammed into it, right? You've got the question of authorship. So you're saying, okay, forget Shakespeare. It wasn't Shakespeare. It was Francis Bacon and this other guy, right? And they worked, and Sir something Neville, right? So they worked together. But why are they doing this? What is the impetus for them to come up with all this? To forge this? Well, it's because they were Rosicrucians, right? And they're protecting something, they're burying something, and it's, it goes back to Herod's vaults in Jerusalem. It was stacked, 700 AD, and they brought something, and that's what it is. And it's like, why? How? So you've got all this really famous big ticket stuff, right? You've got whatever was in Herod's vault, which is probably like the menorah or the Ark of the Covenant. You got your Indiana Jones type shit, and then you've got probably the most famous author on the face of the planet, and something that's worth, the folio is worth, like, again, millions and millions of dollars. It's interesting, and it's sort of like, it's crazy. But my only other little thought, which is totally a tangent to this, but is about authorship, because I always thought that was sort of the question of the authorship was interesting, but it's not the only place in literature and famous literature that it's happened.
Yeah.
Speaking of Sherlock, I was going back and looking into this a little bit more, and it was reminding me of this book I read a long time ago called, well, it was a few years ago now, The Sherlockian, and it draws the difference between two types of looking at any kind of canon literature. That either you're a Doyleist or you're a Watsonian. A Doyleist is someone who has the story and is looking at the universe of the story. It's an out-of-universe reading of it. So I am writing the story and I am sick of writing it, so I am going to kill Sherlock. Okay. This is where he's going to go. He's going to go over the falls, right? If I'm a Watsonian, I'm in universe, and my perception of it is he is now dead, but I'm still writing about him, and he may eventually come back.
I get it. Okay, yeah.
Right? So then there's even a further step that says a Doyleist. There's some splinter branches, I guess, of Doylism that says that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was the literary agent to Dr. Watson, who was a real person, who in turn was the best friend and compatriot of Sherlock Holmes. Right? So you've got even this, which I think is kind of fun, and is even taking the idea of somebody who's, again, like Benedict Cumberbatch, who's now playing Sherlock. Like, that character just is so real, just doesn't die. He didn't die. He didn't die in the time he was being written for The Strand. They brought him back, and he's so real to people that sort of has this it has its own momentum of authorship, which I think is kind of cool. And
yeah,
it is.
Yeah, I love all that. Like, what are they? I forget what they call it, but it's like mind universes, right? Where you, like the Lord of the Rings, or my favorite one is the Elder Scrolls, which is a video game series, but I'm so into it, dude. It's got its own like cosmogony, it's got everything, man. Yeah.
See, now I want to play it.
Oh, you totally should. Oh my god, you totally should. Skyrim, Morrowind, start with Morrowind so you can get the full flavor. It's like really dated. It's not a little dated, it's really dated, but it's so fucking good. All right, that's all the time we have for this week's Roundtable episode. We will start again next time with Clean Coal, the topic that we keep trying to get to, but somehow keep missing.
It'll still be around.
It'll be fine.
They'll still be debating it.
They'll still be talking about it like it isn't already a thing that we all know what it means. All of us know what it means. We haven't told you guys yet, so you don't know what it means. But I know, so whatever. I am very thankful for all the listeners. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, with my co-host, Marie Mayhew.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for putting up with me.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty nice of you all to listen to us for some reason. I'll be back.
Thank you.
I'll be back in a week with another Mad Scientist podcast episode proper. And then in 2 weeks, we should have another roundtable. Follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Podbean for all updates and everything. And thank you again for listening.
Thank you.